I had taken up a night shift job at a gas station out of necessity. Money was tight, and I needed a second job to make ends meet. The night shift was quiet, allowing me to get some reading done or catch up on studies. Most nights passed without incident, with the occasional customer stopping by for a quick purchase or to fill up their tank. However, a few months into the job, a man began showing up regularly, always around 2 a.m. His presence soon became a consistent part of my shift. He was a tall man, standing around 6 feet, with long, stringy hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. His attire was just as unkempt, often wearing a shabby coat that had seen better days. Each time he came in, he would head straight for the beer section, grab a tall boy, and come to the counter. The routine never changed. He'd pay, crack open the beer, and leave, usually muttering to himself as he walked out. The first time he asked me for my name, it caught me off guard. It was unusual for customers, especially at that hour, to strike up a conversation. I told him my name was Rob, to which he responded with a strange smile and said, "Rob, I like that," chuckling under his breath. He seemed amused by the name, repeating it a few times as if savoring it. It was odd, but I dismissed it as just another quirky encounter at the gas station. As time went on, he continued to appear almost nightly. His state of sobriety varied. Some nights he was clearly more inebriated than others. There were evenings when he seemed barely able to stand, leaning heavily on the shelves for support. On one such night, I decided to ask for his name. After a long pause, he finally said, "Bob." Something about the way he said it made me think it was a fake name. It felt too generic, almost like he picked the first name that came to mind. I wondered if he chose Bob because it rhymed with Rob, but I didn't press further. There was an air of mystery about him, and part of me was curious, while another part was wary. One night, as he leaned against the shelf, staring blankly at the wall, I asked him what he did for a living. He laughed, a loud, unsettling laugh that seemed to echo in a quiet store. He said he didn't work, that the government had screwed him over. His eyes, though glazed from alcohol, had a glint of anger. He looked at me and said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." His comment was puzzling, and I wasn't sure how to respond. There was something menacing in his tone, yet he also seemed almost pitiable, like a man defeated by life. After this conversation, he left the store, and I didn't see him for over a week. Given his regular visits, this was unusual and left me with an uneasy feeling. Bob, or whatever his real name was, always exuded a mildly creepy vibe. His presence was unsettling, and I often wondered what his life was like outside of these late-night interactions. Did he have family or friends? Was he struggling with more than just alcohol? These questions lingered, especially after the night he returned, and the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of tension. It was a stormy night, the kind where the rain poured down in sheets, and the wind howled through the cracks of the old gas station. Fewer customers came in, likely deterred by the weather. The store was almost eerily silent, with only the sound of the rain pounding against the roof. Around 2 a.m., I heard the familiar ding of the door. Before I even looked up, I had a feeling it was Bob. When I finally did, I was struck by how different he looked. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from his hair and clothes. He stood just inside the doorway, staring ahead at the wall, his eyes glazed over but intense. There was something different in his demeanor. He seemed more agitated, more disconnected from reality. I called out to him, asking if he was okay. He didn't respond at first, just continued to stare blankly. Then, without turning his head, he said, "I did something really bad." His voice was flat, emotionless, and it sent a chill down my spine. I asked what he meant, but he simply repeated, "I need somewhere to hide," before walking past me towards the restroom area. He disappeared from view, and I heard the door to one of the restrooms close. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Something about the way he spoke and acted made me deeply uneasy. He seemed more disturbed than usual, and the cryptic statement about doing something bad lingered in my mind. Minutes passed, and Bob didn't come out of the bathroom. I assumed he might be drunk again, perhaps passed out or sick. The storm outside intensified, and suddenly, the power went out, plunging the store into darkness. I was left in the pitch black, with only the sound of the storm and my racing heartbeat. The situation felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Alone in the dark with an unstable, possibly dangerous man, I knew I had to do something. Using the flashlight behind the counter, I made my way towards the back of the store, where the panel board was located. The restrooms were in the same hallway, and as I passed, I noticed both doors were ajar. Bob was not in either of them. Panic set in as I realized he was somewhere in the store, and I had no idea where. I cautiously entered the back room, planning to check the panel board, but I froze when I heard a faint dripping sound. The room was filled with the soft, eerie noise of wet shoes squeaking on the floor. I called out, "Bob." My voice sounded weak and scared. Suddenly, from the shadows, Bob lunged at me, screaming, "I'm gonna kill you." His eyes were wild, and he looked deranged. I managed to push him off, his nails scratching my back as I did. I bolted for the front of the store, not daring to look back. Once outside, I fumbled with my keys, got into my car, and locked the doors. I called 911, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. The police arrived quickly, and I watched as they entered the store, weapons drawn. Bob was found hiding in a corner of the back room, his pupils dilated and his demeanor crazed. He was clearly under the influence of something. They took him into custody, and it wasn't until a month later that I learned his real name was Martin. He had been on the run after brutally beating his ex-wife to death, likely on the same night he came into the gas station. The whole experience left me shaken, and I knew I couldn't handle the night shift anymore. The thought of what could have happened if things had gone differently haunted me. I'd done a lot of night driving, not for work, but out of habit from my younger days. My friends and I would stay out until the early hours, thinking we were cool for being out so late. We often drove around, hung out at parks, or loitered in parking lots. It was a way to pass the time, though looking back, it seems like a waste. However, those experiences made me familiar with the roads at odd hours and the kind of people you might encounter. Drunks, the lost, and sometimes the dangerous. One night, around 4 a.m., I was driving a friend home from a park where we had been hanging out. After dropping them off, I realized I needed gas, so I stopped at a familiar station not far from my parents' house. The place was deserted, which wasn't unusual for that time. As I walked towards the building to pay, a short man in a hoodie passed me. He stopped and stared as I walked by, his eyes following me. I felt a surge of annoyance and asked, "What?" But he didn't respond. He just kept staring, giving off an unsettling vibe. I dismissed him as a typical weirdo and went inside to pay for the gas. Inside, I grabbed a lottery ticket, more out of habit than hope, and paid for my gas. The same man from outside followed me into the store and stood behind me as I paid. He commented on my clothing, saying he liked my top. His tone was creepy, and I felt my skin crawl. I responded with a curt "thank you" and quickly made my way back to my car. As I pumped gas, I noticed the man standing on the other side of the pump, watching me. He wasn't there to fill up. He had no car. He was just standing there, staring. The situation felt increasingly threatening. He asked if I was alone, and my instincts screamed danger. I lied, saying my boyfriend was in the car. I opened the door and grabbed my pepper spray, keeping it hidden but ready. The man started to inch around the pump, and I could see his intentions weren't good. He said he didn't see anyone in the car, and I pulled out the pepper spray, pointing it at him. He laughed and backed away, but his eyes stayed locked on me. My tank was full, but I still had change to collect from the cashier inside. I had to make a decision. leave immediately or go back inside to get my change. I chose the latter, not wanting to leave money behind, even if it was just a few dollars. Inside, I told the cashier that the man outside was making me uncomfortable. The cashier seemed unfazed, likely not understanding the gravity of the situation or simply not caring. I collected my change and looked outside, not seeing the man immediately. My heart was racing and I hesitated, fearing he was hiding somewhere, waiting for an opportunity. I stood just inside the door, scanning the area. The man was nowhere in sight, which was almost more frightening than seeing him. I decided to wait until another car arrived, hoping for some backup. After a few tense minutes, a pickup truck pulled into the station. A large man with a beard stepped out, and I approached him, explaining the situation and asking if he could check around my car. He agreed, though he looked puzzled by my request. He walked around my car, and I stayed close to the door, holding the pepper spray tightly. Suddenly, I heard him shout, "What are you doing?" The creepy man had been hiding behind my car, and he bolted as the truck driver approached. He ran off into the darkness, disappearing into the night. The truck driver told me to be careful and left. I got into my car and drove off, my hands still shaking. The realization that the man had been waiting to possibly attack me once I unlocked my car doors was terrifying. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after me or hiding somewhere along the route home. It was the most frightening experience I'd ever had while driving at night. The encounter left me rattled, and I was much more cautious about stopping at isolated places late at night after that. The scariest encounter from my childhood happened in the mid-60s in the Atlanta area. I was about 8 or 9 years old at the time. My father was a school teacher, and I attended the same school where he taught. Because of this, we had to get up very early every morning and drive a long distance to the school. We often stopped at a small, independent gas station along the way to top off on gas. It was a quaint place with full service, a rarity today. The attendant was always there, ready to fill our tank, clean the windows, and handle the payment. He was a friendly older man, always carrying a lot of bills in his pocket and a coin counter on his belt. Behind the pumps were small, single-stall bathrooms. I often used them in the mornings before continuing our journey. One morning, we arrived at the gas station as usual, just before dawn. The place was eerily quiet, and there were no other cars around. My father honked the horn a few times, but there was no response. The station seemed deserted. We waited, wondering where the attendant could be. My father speculated that he might be in the bathroom, or perhaps had car trouble and couldn't make it in time. After several minutes with no sign of the attendant, my father decided we couldn't wait any longer and left, saying we would stop at the next station. A day or two later, while reading the local newspaper, my father suddenly exclaimed loudly. He called my mother and me over, pointing to a small article. The article reported that the body of a gas station attendant had been found in the men's bathroom at the station we always stopped at. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times. The motive appeared to be robbery, as all the cash and coins were missing from the station. The article didn't specify the amount stolen, but it was clear that the crime was cold-blooded. The realization that we had been at the scene of a murder, potentially with the perpetrator still nearby, was chilling. I often wondered what would have happened if I had insisted on using the bathroom that morning and stumbled upon the scene. The thought of finding the body at such a young age was terrifying. We never returned to that gas station again. The incident left a deep impression on me, a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in unexpected places. It was a story that stayed with me, a haunting memory of how close we had come to a potentially traumatic experience. A more recent encounter happened when I was 25. I was driving from North to South Texas, a trip necessitated by work. Due to my schedule, I could only make the drive late at night. The route was mostly along Road 281, a straightforward but long and tiring journey. I was exhausted from work and struggled to stay awake. To keep myself going, I made frequent stops for coffee at gas stations along the way. It was during one of these stops that I had a deeply unsettling experience. It was around 2 a.m., and I pulled into a gas station to fill up my tank and grab another coffee. The station was nearly empty, save for one other car parked by the convenience store. I parked by the pump, went inside, and headed straight for the coffee machine. While pouring my coffee, I noticed a man pacing the aisles. He approached me and said, "Careful, it's hot." His comment was unnecessary and felt like a forced attempt at conversation. I gave a polite nod, not in the mood to engage, and continued to the counter to pay for my gas and coffee. The man followed me to the counter, standing too close for comfort. As I paid, he commented on my top, saying he liked it. His tone was off, making me uncomfortable. He then asked where I was headed so late at night. His invasive questions and proximity made me feel cornered. I firmly told him to leave me alone. The cashier, a middle-aged Hispanic man, seemed oblivious or indifferent to the tension. The man backed off, but as I left the store, I felt his eyes on me. As I pumped gas, I noticed the man was standing on the other side of the pump, just staring. He wasn't there to get gas. He had no car. He was simply watching me. My unease grew as I realized how isolated we were. The man then asked if I was alone. Alarmed, I lied, saying my boyfriend was in the car. I reached into the car and grabbed my pepper spray, holding it discreetly. The man slowly started moving around the pump towards me, saying he didn't see anyone in the car. I pointed the pepper spray at him, and he laughed, backing away slightly but still keeping his eyes on me. I finished pumping gas, quickly retrieved my change from the cashier, and hurried back to my car. As I was getting ready to leave, I noticed the man was no longer in sight. Panic set in. He could be hiding anywhere, waiting for a chance to pounce. I sat in my car, doors locked, and debated what to do. I didn't want to drive off without knowing where he was. Just then, a pickup truck pulled into the lot. The driver, a large man with a beard, got out, and I ran over to him, explaining the situation. He agreed to check around my car. As he did, I saw the creepy man emerge from behind my car, where he had been hiding. He quickly ran off into the darkness. The truck driver looked at me, shook his head, and told me to be careful. I left the station, my heart pounding. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't been vigilant was terrifying. The man had likely been waiting for an opportunity to attack once I unlocked my car. This incident made me much more cautious about stopping at isolated places late at night. The memory of that night, the fear and uncertainty, still lingers, a stark reminder of how quickly a situation can turn dangerous. These experiences, each unique and frightening in their own way, have left a lasting impact on me. Working night shifts, driving at odd hours, and encountering strange and potentially dangerous individuals have taught me to be constantly aware of my surroundings. They serve as reminders that danger can appear when least expected, and sometimes the most mundane places can become the backdrop for terrifying encounters.